whole idea of portals, I think, is very interesting.
Mm.
I'm not trying to switch things around here, but there seem to be such places. You know, there seem to be certain places that people have encountered where there's very bizarre things happening. There's this. I met with a woman years ago, who got very animated. She told me of a story that happened to her back in the 1970s, and she was in Hawaii on a date with a guy.
Okay.
So
is it Maui? Do you know which island?
I don't know exactly where
There's
she was.
some wild stuff going on in Maui, but don't get me started on Maui. Okay. Anyway, yeah.
Well, I'm going to get you started on it later because I want to know
later,
what to talk about.
Okay, I'll tell you later.
All right.
So, yeah.
So, but anyway, she was
on a date with this guy.
She was in Hawaii, and she was on like this romantic evening,
Okay.
and they were lying on a hillside, looking at the stars, basically. So right, you know. But then she said, we were both looking straight up, and we both saw this window in the sky, this window of light, and she said it was like square, and it went, it opened up, and they both looked at it for several seconds, maybe not more than 5 seconds, but maybe about 5 seconds. Opens up, and then closed. And just watching her describe it to me, this lady got very animated. I mean, she got worked up.
Mm-hmm.
I heard this story before my first book was published. I was probably in the home stretch of writing it, and she probably learned that I was doing it. And she said, "Oh my God, I have to tell you this story." And she just, I mean, she ran all over the room describing everything to me. She was, and in fact, it was one of those things that she didn't even tell her husband, who wasn't the guy that she was out on the date with, so maybe that was why, who knows. But she hadn't told anybody. And she told me, yeah.
It's good you found a safe place to be able to tell you. What's the name of your first book?
UFOs and the National Security State, and it's the first volume. I've done 2 volumes. So they're both 500 and then 600 pages each. They're big fat books. They're essentially, they do a couple of things. They talk about the important sightings that matter from the 1940s, and the volume 2 takes it up to 1991, the end of the Cold War. So if you want interested in a particular important event, I hoped that I covered in one of those books. But then there's politics. I try to weave that in and ask myself, what is the interest of the U.S. government, primarily the U.S. government, in this phenomenon? Who's running the show? Is there a group in charge and whatnot? And then the third leg of the book would be looking at civilians and researchers and like what ordinary people have thought about this phenomenon. People who've tried to end secrecy. People who are trying to research this phenomenon and just figure it out, and how has that whole thing evolved. That's a fascinating story, and it really hadn't been told. So I tried to weave all of that together into a very comprehensive history.
Right, like the evolution of us trying to figure it all out.
It's the history, exactly. It's a history of our own consciousness trying to grapple with this greatest of mysteries in the history of the world.
From like 1947, and then the...
Exactly. We've come a long way. It's been a long, long journey of learning. So that's the 2 volumes of UFOs and National Security State, and there will be a third. I expect it done. I'm going to be deep back into it this summer of 2014. Any time now.
In what way?
Like finishing it, getting volume 3 done. It's going to be another 600-page book.
Wow, great.
These things, they take a lot out of me. I would have had volume 3 done years ago, but I wrote 2 books in the interim.
Which other books?
I wrote a book about the future. I co-authored that one called AD, After Disclosure. And it's basically a speculative book, but with my feet on the ground, looking at a world of the end of UFO secrecy. So my co-author asked, how might UFO secrecy end? Like, would it ever really end? Some people think, no, it's impossible, it'll never end. But I think it's a paradox. It's impossible, but it's inevitable. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And then what happens after the end of that secrecy? How will it rock our world? And that's really what that book explores.
Yeah.
That was a great adventure writing that book. I had a good co-author. And basically, by the end of it, we realized this is an absolutely, utterly, completely revolutionary phenomenon, and that is exactly why the secrecy is so intense. Because this will change everything. Everything. So then I was about to get back into volume 3 after I finished AD, and then I ended up doing a different book called UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. And that's a total fresh summation of the whole subject, of everything, of all of its amazing, baffling, insane, crazy profundity. Because it's everything. You know, it makes you crazy, but it makes you wise. And it does, so it talks about the history from ancient aliens to today. I cover the whole history of it. But there's a lot of philosophy in this book. There's a lot of politics, deep politics, not bullshit kindergarten politics, but sophisticated politics that deals with how does a cover-up actually work, at least to the best of my ability to understand this. But not just the politics. I look at social implications, the whole aspect of contact. What's happening when people are having these experiences? How is it affecting them? What the hell are we dealing with? Who are these other entities? What could they be? I really try to explore this in a sophisticated way. And then there's, beyond that, it's the science, the crazy science that just doesn't seem to make sense, but actually it does. Whether we're talking about something as simple as propulsion technology, to space-time manipulation, to string theory, to dimensions, to consciousness, to entanglement, all of those things matter in the UFO phenomenon. A lot of the book deals with social implications of this. In other words, what is it like to study UFOs today as opposed to 1950? How's it different? What are the issues we deal with in an age of YouTube videos being posted and Facebook copy and paste rumor and the whole kind of movement of new age ideology and consciousness also into the UFO study? What does that mean? I really try to explore all of that and just understand it and kind of get it. And then I do have a fresh chapter on looking at the future, sort of a revised AD that ends the book, looking into the future, because I constantly have new thoughts on disclosure and what it means for us. And so those are fresh thoughts that I put at the end of the book. So for me, everything that I feel is important about the UFO subject makes up UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. And I wrote it as the best new introduction to the whole subject. That was my intention, for newbies and experienced people alike. So it was ambitious, 500 pages, I'm done with it. Now, and I'm glad I did it, but I want to go back to volume 3 and get that thing done and get it off my plate. I feel like, you know, I feel like the luckiest guy that I know, honestly.
Yeah, you've had quite the journey.
It's been an amazing journey. Here's why. First of all, I get to do what I love. It's not always what I love. I get to do what I'm maniacally obsessed by. That's really a little more accurate. This thing grabs you. It grabs me, and it doesn't let me go. I've thrown my life onto the altar of this subject. I mean, that's the truth. And I'm a lifer. That's fine. But I get to do it. I wake up in the morning and I think, I've got a great life and I have a lot of cool things that I'm investigating, fascinating mysteries, amazing people that I meet along the way, like you and Brian, and a lot of the other people here in Vancouver that I've just loved meeting. So I get to do that. I get to learn. But the journey. So here's the journey. In a nutshell. 20 years ago, I started. 20 years ago, I was trying to wrap up a doctoral dissertation in Cold War studies. Harry Truman and the Soviet Union, the Russians, the birth of the CIA. And that's all interesting stuff. No flying saucers in that whole bit. You know? Then, somehow, who knows why, because I still don't know why to this day, I stumbled into the subject of UFOs. I saw a book in a bookstore. A great book, which is on Brian's shelf over there. Timothy Good's Above Top Secret. If you find it, you can bring it over and I'll show you. I'm looking right at it. It's right on the bottom shelf, second to the left.
Ooh, do you want
Am I getting it wrong there?
Do you want us to put a bit of grapefruit juice in that? Or do you want?
Do you think I should?
Well, I don't know if you need energy or anything.
I'm cool right now.
You can have the water.
Oh, here it is.
I might put some grapefruit juice.
I thought I was looking right at it. So we will show the good people.
So this is the book that changed your life.
This actually did. So I was at a bookstore in the early 90s, like a million years ago, and this book was on a display stand. And I basically said, hello, what's this? And it says, Above Top Secret, the Worldwide UFO Cover-Up. And that was what got my attention. And I thought, for realsies? And I flipped through the book just like this. And I saw names that I'd recognized in my study, departments that I had studied in my academic work. And the difference, though, was that Timothy Good was putting them in a context that was totally different, of course, and putting them together in a UFO context. And, you know, even a casual glance at this could tell that it looked like he was doing a pretty good job. And I had this moment of what I call cultural schizophrenia. The opposition of official truth, what we're supposed to believe, and unofficial truth, what actually a lot of intelligent people seemingly do believe. They're not the same sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I just had one tiny little question in my mind at the time. It wasn't even, are UFOs real? That was not my question in this book, when I looked at this book.
What was your question?
My question was this a thing that my government cared about? Whether they were right or wrong. Did the U.S. government, circa 1950, give a shit about UFOs? Because if they did, even if they were wrong about it, why had I never read about it in any academic history book? How is that not interesting? Because that's really interesting.
Good point.
And, right, simple question. And so I thought, I'm going to take a little bit of time out of my life, and I'm going to dive into this. This is what I do periodically. I'll get like obsessively interested in a thing, in a topic, and I'll just throw myself into it. So I thought, I'm going to do it with UFOs. What the hell? Why not? But the problem with the UFO subject is it's like...
the rabbit hole.
It is. It's the rabbit hole. It's like Odysseus' sirens. It just calls you, and then you're like...
Curiosity kills kitties.
You're in, right. So here's what happened. I got the answer to my first question pretty early on. Hell yes, they were interested. The declassified documents, some of which are here, and some of which were in other books, that makes it very clear. U.S. government, oh yeah, they were interested. So then that leads to other questions. Why were they interested? Well, that's a pretty interesting answer. As I said earlier to you, airspace violations, unknown objects, that seemed to be doing amazing things, performance that wasn't supposed to be possible. So that leads to other questions. Were they actually seeing other things? You know, was this genuine? And the deeper you go, the more it looked like, actually, yeah, it did look like it. Did they ever stop being interested? Turns out, no, hell no, they never stopped being interested, despite their lies. So it didn't take long before I realized, this is pretty darn interesting, and I want to get to the bottom of this.